weren't able to come back and join us, because I know there are many families who have kids that it might be tough for them to join us again. Maybe they might have moved on to other programs that have stable internet, so to speak. Okay, so inshallah, tomorrow we'll resolve this issue. We'll have to talk to the internet company, and inshallah, we'll try to get the fastest upload speed. So, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I have to remember the topic that we were talking about. What was the topic of our lecture? Focusing on what matters, right? Okay, all right. So we spoke about then the logical argument that has to do with understanding the reality of things, and really, essentially what I was saying in that first part in the logical argument was that we have to focus on the things that are real, the things that are true, right? And that has a lot to do with our perception of things, correct? Because realizing what is true might differ from one person to the other. So what really is the truth? And that's when we went back to our reference point. And our reference point was Allah Almighty, right? And that Allah is the unlimited. And that the truth is known through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That if I look at the truth through that lens, then that lens will be a divine lens, right? It will be a lens that will guide me only to the truth and to nothing else. And we started with a very important surah, and that was the surah of Al-Asr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by time that surely man is in a state of loss. He says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except for those who believe, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and as a result of their belief, they do good deeds, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, and they collectively remind each other of the truth, and they collectively remind each other to be patient. So we started off then, after we finished the logical part of this lecture, the logical discourse, we started looking at some studies and some research that has been done by psychologists and academics, right? And we said that they found that the average office worker, they are distracted every 3 minutes. And we also said that according to the Human Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, that it takes 25 minutes just to regain our focus, right, after being distracted. Now imagine in a world that is full of distractions in our day and age, how it might be difficult for us to focus on anything, right? So number 3, we looked at how is it that our brain actually chooses what to focus on and how to control it. And as I recall, that's, I think, where we left off. We were talking about that point, and we said that the brain is always on, according to research. And that means that it's always taking in information. Even when we're sleeping, the brain is still working, right? Meaning that it constantly has to choose at this time between what? Between what to pay attention to and what to filter out. And what neuroscientists actually call this is selective attention. And it comes in 2 different forms. One is called the top-down form, which is called voluntary focus, and the other is called the bottom-up form, which is stimulus-driven focus. And we said that the voluntary focus is the important focus, right? It's the focus that causes us to be goal-oriented, allows us to achieve our goals. It's the type of focus that we use when we're studying for an exam, and we basically divorce ourselves from the world, and we lock ourselves in the library, right? In one of those study booths, so that nobody who knows us comes and distracts us, right? That's the type of focus that is the top-down focus, or the voluntary focus. The second type is the bottom-up focus, and that is the stimulus-driven focus. And you can understand from its name, stimulus-driven, that there's a stimulus and I react to it right away. And that is what most distractions are to us. So when a thought creeps into our mind, or we hear a ring from our notifications, or the phone rings, automatically what happens is we get distracted. In many cases, what ends up happening is that even when I'm just sitting there and I'm, focusing, somebody will come, a sibling will come, my parents will come, and they'll want me to do something, and I can't focus on what I'm doing, right? And it can drive a person nuts sometimes. So what truly is the problem? Why is it that I can't focus, right? So what the studies show is that we can't really control what kind of focus our brain is using. That's what some of the studies suggest. despite our want to stay in the top-down mode of focus, right? Unfortunately, what ends up happening is our brain is overridden by the other type of focus, the bottom-up focus, and that's the stimulus-driven focus, as you recall. Why is that? Because if you have heard or read, or read the book, The Teenage Brain, you'll find that it actually says in there that, you know, we do have, when we look at the human brain has the cortex or the neocortex, and it has the everything else, okay? So the cortex or the neocortex is the outer lining, and that's considered to be the white matter. And everything other than that is considered to be gray matter. Now, there's an area in our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is basically our fight or flight center, okay? Now, this amygdala, what it does is it basically sabotages us, okay? So it's quick to react. So when I hear a stimulus through my two channels of communication, my eyesight and my hearing, what ends up happening is I can be distracted from thinking rationally. Now, in fight or flight, when there's something that's an emergency, what usually happens is that the amygdala kicks in and we become reactive. But in normal circumstances, you know, when I'm talking to people and there's no stress and there's nothing emergent, right? No emergencies. What ends up happening is really everything from these two channels, from my eyes and from my ears, goes right to my thalamus, and my thalamus then sends it off to my neocortex. But when I'm distracted, the amygdala kicks in, and the amygdala ends up sabotaging me from focusing on what's important, okay? So, and this occurs without me even realizing it. Now, of course, I've mentioned before that when we hear those dings or those rings or those notifications go off, what happens is we get a stimulus response in our brain called dopamine. There's a release of dopamine, and dopamine is a happy hormone, meaning that it's the same exact hormone that causes addicts to become addicted to their drugs, right? It's the same hormone that is released when an addict gets their fix, okay? And it's the exact same hormone that's released when we hear that notification, we get that satisfaction of checking our messages, okay? So that means then that this is problematic because this system is going to throw my focus completely off. This is going to throw my focus completely off, and this is problematic, right? And focus is really important if I want my perception to be right? If I want it to be correct. So there's a tight connection also between focus and between willpower. Now, why is it, okay, so we understand why we're talking about focus, because we want to focus on the important things in life. But then, you know, once I recognize what's important in life, you know, how do I focus on it, right? That requires willpower, because I have to be able to do what? I have to be able to monitor myself and make the right decisions. And that can only occur if I have the willpower to remove myself from the distractions and to focus on what's important, right? So what do the studies tell us? There's a good book I want you to read. It's called Willpower, in actual fact, and it's by Bonemeister, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, and Tierney, okay? And I want to cite something from chapter 9, then I'll go backward and cite something they mentioned in chapter 6 of their book. They say, and here we want to talk about the human condition, why it is that, you know, we have this issue of lack of focus, which leads to lack of willpower. And controlling our focus requires us to have willpower. So how am I going to get that willpower? Now, what the studies did is that, or showed in this 9th chapter of his book, is that in actual fact, there's a theory called the theory of self-esteem. Stay with me, and you'll see how self-esteem, why self-esteem is important here. So, of course, what's important to most people is academic success, right? Most of us growing up, as we come into ourselves and as we grow older, we are really kind of valued in accordance with how well we do in school, right? And because of that, what ends up happening is, if you attain lower grades, then you're really not as well valued as somebody who attains higher grades, right? Exactly like if you're an athlete and you're great at being athletic, then you're valued higher than someone who's not athletic, right? This is the way the system is in school. So the same thing applies with us at home, with our parents. What ends up happening, and with our peers, is if we do, or with our teachers, when we do well in school, then we're valued, right? Now, what academics wanted to do was they wanted to figure out a way to ensure that people, these students, do well in school. So what they did was they had this theory, and it's called the theory of self-esteem. And they contended, I'm trying to pronounce his name, Baumeister himself also believed in this, that self-esteem was the reason why people did bad in school. If they come from houses that are unstable, that maybe are riddled with divorce or with domestic violence, or they have an addict in their home, or their father was an alcoholic, or their mother's an alcoholic, or some sort of family instability, then that causes low self-esteem. And as a result, their grades will be low. So that is the theory. Now, psychologists, famous psychologists such as Nathaniel Branden agreed with this. Andre Mecca headed a task force on self-esteem in the state of California, and the self-esteem movement actually started. And what was the self-esteem movement? The movement was to increase student self-esteem. And how would they do that? They would basically praise them for everything. Whether they did well in school or they did bad in school, they're going to praise them either way. So coaches started giving trophies to everyone, not just to the people who made first place and second place and third place, right? And this transition was very obvious. This is during the age of the millennials. As they're growing up, there's no loser. Everybody is a winner, right? And so what ends up happening is teachers end up teaching students to also say that, I'm really good at things, right? I'm good at school, even though they might not be. I'm a good person. I'm a happy person, even though they might not be. Okay? So then what ends up happening is, after much research and following up on these students, Neil Smeltzer, who is a distinguished sociologist at the University of Berkeley in California, he edited the final report from the state of California on this self-esteem movement. And he found that the evidence really was inconclusive, that them focusing on children's self-esteem or students' self-esteem didn't seem to improve their grades at all. In actual fact, the contrary happened. A professor of psychology at the Virginia Commonwealth University did a study where he randomly would send messages to students who got C's, and other students, these students who got C's were broken down to two groups. Those who received messages that encouraged them, even if they got a bad grade, meaning the C, and those who received a neutral message. Now, what he ended up finding out was that those students who received messages of encouragement, even after getting the C, they ended up doing worse, not better, right? And as a matter of fact, what ended up happening is that self-esteem then became a problem when it came to success and when it came to the willpower to actually focus on studying. They found that they ended up having a lack of focus on studying and absolutely no willpower or need even to be successful at school. The other problem that they found was that, in actual fact, this actually led to a condition within millennials where some of them became outright narcissistic. And narcissistic is when a person believes that the entire world revolves around them. Everything is centered around them, okay? They are the center of praise. If a conversation isn't about them, then they don't care for it, right? If they're not being praised, then, you know, they don't care for it. They can outright be nasty if things don't go their way, right? And we see examples of this, for example, with Donald Trump, okay? Now, what the study showed is that the incidences of narcissism actually increased because of the amount of praise that children and students were being given. And this is quite interesting. Why? Because of the fact that an entire generation was actually created to just self-love themselves, self-praise themselves, and not need anybody to praise them. Does this sound familiar? How many people from the millennials take shots of themselves, right? Post them all the time, are basically attention seeking. They want people to like their stuff. They want people to like their pictures, their photos. They take photos from all different angles, right? They show the clothes they wear. They show the food that they eat. They do all of that stuff. And more and more what we found, what the research shows is that the root cause of this is the fact that there was the self-esteem movement, unfortunately, right? Now, one thing though, that was positive that came out of this is that they found that such individuals actually displayed more initiative when they first started. However, in chapter 6 of the book Willpower, what he found was that in actual fact, studies showed that a person who is like that, when they enter a social structure, when they're dealing with other members of the community, at the very beginning, everybody likes them and wants to be with them, right? And enjoys telling everybody that they know them. However, after a few months, they end up disliking them because they don't know how to get along with people, because everything has to be about them and them alone. So now this is problematic, okay? So here we are, we're trying to figure out how it is that we can improve people's willpower, right? And their focus so that they can focus on what's true. And the academic research shows that in order to do that, they started on trying to build self-esteem. However, they found that this caused lack of focus. In actual fact, it ended up causing the person to focus on themselves, so much so that it caused many of them to become narcissistic and to do terribly at school, which means that they had a lack of willpower and showed a lack of drive to be successful in their academics. In chapter 6, he also mentions a study that was done with 3 groups of students. One was told to fix their posture over a period of 2 weeks. The other group was told to actually log the food that they eat. And third group, I can't remember what it is, it'll come to my mind. But the important thing is this, is that what they found is that each one of these groups had certain difficulties. The first group, they had no problem with fixing their posture, okay? So that was good. The second group had huge problems in writing down or logging everything that they ate, okay? So what these studies actually showed was the fact that assigning somebody a goal isn't as linear as we might think, right? Because it depends on the objective or the goal that the person is assigned. So slouching, for example, and rolling your shoulders back and fixing your posture when you're sitting and when you're walking, that was easy for people to do. But things that were associated with willpower, that was hard for people to be successful at doing. And monitoring was the hard thing for them to do. And that's what the second group actually showed. So that means then that willpower is at the heart of success. And focusing, in order to be able to monitor yourself, is at the heart of attaining that willpower. So I have to learn how to focus, right? And I have to have the willpower to be able to focus. Now, the good thing is that in Kelly McGonigal's book, The Willpower Instinct, she actually says, just as Von Meister and Turney say, I believe in their 10th chapter, that willpower is actually something that you can learn, right? But it requires practice. That's all it requires. It requires a lot of practice, right? Now, how is it then that I'm going to be able to practice? Now, incidentally, I did want to mention something before I forget, and that is that the studies also show that people who only get 6 hours of sleep they tend to be very distracted. They are unable to focus and to concentrate, and their willpower is usually terrible, right? So that means that number one, what I can do is make sure that I get more than 6 hours of sleep. That's number one. Number two, I have to be able to recognize the triggers, because you see, willpower and focus is sabotaged by, we said, what? The stimulus-based type of focus, right? That when I get a stimulus such as a notification or something else like that, that throws me off the bandwagon, my amygdala takes over, right? And I sabotage myself. So what I need to do then is I need to be able to surpass that amygdala and learn, how to get everything processed through my thalamus so that my neocortex can make the rational decisions for me and apply my willpower. So what do? I have to practice the situations that I'm going to fall into. And I have to recognize what my triggers are, and I have to stay away from those triggers, right? And I have to do this habitually, meaning that I have to focus on when it is that I have to determine with a log, write down when it is that I am triggered and what are the things that trigger me. And once I do that, then every day I become more aware of what I'm doing. And if I log my day and realize what it is that I'm doing and when I'm doing it, then it becomes easier for me to be able to monitor myself and to stay away from those triggers, okay? And people also can be triggered, by the way, all right? So we know for a fact that an addict might be clean, but once they see someone who they used to use with, automatically it becomes much harder and they fall off the bandwagon. And the same applies to people who are alcoholics. Same applies to people who smoke cigarettes, and the same applies to sugar addicts, okay? So don't be around people who have a sweet tooth, okay? Or don't walk down that candy aisle, okay? All right, so how does that help me? So the research then all shows me that in order for me to be able to be focused, right, and to have willpower, that these are the things that I need to do. Notice though, everything here tends to be more materialistic when it comes to the studies, right? There's nothing spiritual or metaphysical at play here. And this is why we need to take a look at the Islamic perspective. And in the third perspective, the Islamic perspective is very, very clear. If we look at the chapter of Al-Asr, where Allah swears by time, it tells us, look, time is important. And at no other time do we realize how important time is important, except in this time of COVID-19. The coronavirus has changed our lives, right? How we do things, how much we appreciate things and value things. And so then we know that our time may be limited. The time of our loved ones may be limited. So now is the time to act. Otherwise, we're going to be in a state of loss. And that's exactly what the next verse says, right? Surely man's in a state of loss. Then what does Allah say? He says, except for those who believe. So that means then, starting at that base, that point, that foundation, that reference point of Tawheed, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His place in my life, and my belief in Him, and my valuing Him, and my commitment to Him by showing Him gratitude, and gratitude through good deeds. And that's the next thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the verse. That my iman is a practical iman. It's not just testifying that I'm Muslim, but it is applying what I learn, right? And applying what Allah wants of me in the Islamic laws and so forth. And so when I do that, I become a kind person. I become a generous person. I become a person who works hard to focus on willingly doing these things. And how do I do that? It's answered in the next part of the verse. It says, and they, as a group, as a congregation, they remind each other of the truth. Listen, you're doing this for a greater purpose. So what is this telling me? It tells me, look, if you want to have willpower, you don't have to do it alone. Actually, the Quran tells you, don't do it alone. Surround yourself with friends that have the same goals as you do, right? They will remind you to have the willpower. Exactly like when I want to go work out, right? It's always better to have a workout partner, someone who encourages you to, and comes and knocks at your door to pull you out and make sure that you go out and work out, right? If I'm the only person dieting, for example, and trying to lose weight at home, it's very, very hard when everybody else isn't, right? But if I have someone else, 2 or 3 people who are also helping me at home, then I'm more likely to be successful, right? And so then tawasaw becomes very important as a concept. Why? Because it's the plural form of tawasa, meaning that you willingly ensure that you monitor yourself in willingly choosing the truth and remembering it, right? That life is short, right? That money comes and goes, right? But the only thing that remains, وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى, Allah says, and the hereafter is better and everlasting, right? And so I need to focus on what we said yesterday, the metaphysical, right? Attaining the ultimate success. And that's what I need to focus on. The most important thing for me to focus on then is my end game, is the hereafter, where I'm going to be and how I'm going to get there. And how I'm going to get there first and foremost is by having faith. And that my faith is a practical faith. It's reflected in my actions, right? And that's how I focus on what's real, right? And if I forget, then I have friends around me who have a similar goal. And we talked about marriage yesterday. And that means that choosing the right life partner who's going to help me do that becomes extremely important, right? Someone who has shared goals, someone who wants me to thrive, not just survive. And then what does Allah say? He says, after he says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, he says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Because you have to learn to be patient in order for you to be successful in adhering to the truth. You have to have patience in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to tell you to do something when it's tough to do. And that's when I respond to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by doing it, that's the greatest show of gratitude that I could ever do. For example, if it becomes easy for me to fall into haram if I'm by myself, right? And on the internet, on YouTube, it's so easy, right? For me to click on an ad or to look at a video that I shouldn't be looking at. And who's going to know? Because no one's around me to see me, right? No one's there, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. And once I remember that Allah is everywhere and He sees everything that I do, then it becomes easy for me to focus on what's real and what's true, right? And so it becomes important for me to surround myself always with people who are going to help me do that. Shaitan wants me to be alone, right? But the research says, Sheikhna, that, in order for me not to be distracted, I need to remove myself from the distractions, right? That doesn't mean remove yourself from people, because there are people who don't distract you. There are people who want you to be better. There are people who want you to focus. Those are the type of people you need, because those are the people that are going to remind you of your goals, right? And the main goal is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every act that you do has to fall within that category. So if it does not meet that criterion, then it doesn't fall into that category, and therefore I will not do it, right? And when I look at things and I want to see the reality of things, it becomes based on that metric, based on that reference point, right? So I can look at an act that somebody is doing, such as watching a football game, for example, and it's time for salah, and I can realize the importance of it and what it becomes. It turns from something that's fun to do to something that's distracting me, right? And not just that, something that I have now started to worship instead of worshiping Allah at this time of day. And that is the reality of things. If I focus, I'll truly be able to see that. Imam Ali salamullahi alayhi says, احذر من فراسة المؤمن فإنه يرى بعين الله. Beware of the insight of a believer, for he sees with the proverbial eye of Allah, with Allah's vision, right? Allah gives him insight and the ability to look beyond the physical into the metaphysical realm and the metaphysical consequences. Because why? Al-akhiratu khayrun wa abqa. And that then gives me patience that prevents me from falling into haram. Patience that prevents me from saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. Patience that allows me to show the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by me holding back my anger, right? When somebody angers me. By me being tolerant when somebody humiliates me, right? And if I do that myself, then I'm going to see the reality of things. But I need to practice it. And that practice requires me to have good mu'mineen around me. I ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to do that and to give us these good mu'mineen around us. You know, this can be achieved from a young age. And a great example of this is Al-Qasim alayhi salam. Al-Qasim was the son of Imam al-Hasan, and tonight is the night of Al-Qasim. It's an extremely important night. It's a night in which we commemorate Al-Qasim ibn al-Hasan salamullahi alayhi. They say, brothers and sisters, that Al-Qasim, Al-Qasim ibn al-Hasan alayhim as-salam, on the land of Karbala, on the day of Ashura, when all of the companions were martyred on the
This
land
was
of
my
Karbala.
teacher. He
All
taught
of
me
the men
everything.
of Ahlul Bayt had gone out to fight a valiant fight, but would end up being martyred on the land of Karbala. That Al-Qasim would keep going back and forth to his uncle, Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi. He'd say to him, Uncle Hussein, please let me go out and fight. Please let me go out and fight and protect the holy household. But Imam al-Hussein would look at him and he would just say to him, you are the trust. Anta al-wadi'a. Please go back to your mother. You're too young to go out there. You're the only thing that I have, the only son remaining of Imam al-Hasan salamullahi alayhi here with me. Please go back to your mother. He would come back and forth asking once, and twice, and thrice. But Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi would not allow him to go. And so finally Al-Qasim is called by his mother into her tent. She would take him into her tent and she would open a chest that she had, and what they would see in the chest was the tunic of Imam al-Hasan salamullahi alayhi, the sword of Imam al-Hasan, the helmet of Imam al-Hasan salamullahi alayhi. She would take the tunic and place it on her son, and the helmet and place it on her son. She would give him the sword of Imam al-Hasan salamullahi alayhi, his father, and she would give him a letter. And she would say, take this letter and go to your uncle al-Hussein alayhi salam. Al-Qasim alayhi salam would walk towards Imam al-Hussein. They say that as he walked towards Imam al-Hussein, the sword was so long that it was being dragged on the floor. When he reached Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi, they say that Imam al-Hussein, when he looked at him, it's as though he could see Imam al-Hasan. He would say to him, dear Uncle Hussein, please read this letter. Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi would open up the letter and he would read it. It was a letter from his brother Imam al-Hasan. It said in it, dear brother Hussein, if you are receiving this letter, then it is the day of Ashura and you are on the land of Karbala. And I cannot be with you, dear brother, on this day, but my son Al-Qasim is here to take my place. And I want you to allow him to go out and to be martyred in the way of Allah. Imam al-Hasan salamullahi alayhi, as he read the letter, the narrators say that he would start weeping. And he would look down sorrowfully at the ground as he was thinking about what he was about to do. For he was about to send Al-Qasim to sure death. And what would happen then? The narrator says he would hug Al-Qasim. And they would both cry. And he would say to him, dear son Qasim, you were the one that was entrusted to me by your father, Imam al-Hasan. And so he would say to him, go bid your mother farewell. He would go bid his mother farewell. He would come back. And Imam al-Hussein, they say that he would take a piece of his amama, of his turban. He would cut it off and he would wrap it around the head of Al-Qasim before he would send him out into the battlefield. He would hug him and kiss him one last time, and then he would bid him farewell, sending him out into the battlefield. He would look out as Al-Qasim made his way through the enemy camp, as he would fight them on the land of Karbala. They say that though he was young, he was able to kill many of the enemies of Allah. But then at one point, as he was fighting valiantly, the laces from his sandals would come apart. And he would stop and go down to try to tie the laces. An evil man from the enemy camp would say, I am going to make his mother regret the day that she brought him to this world. I'm going to attack him right now. And he would actually run towards him. And as Al-Qasim was down tying his shoelaces, this evil man would strike him on his head with the sword. هل من منادي ينادي وقاسما وقاسما ومظلوما. And then what would happen is he would fall flat on the face. His face on the land of Karbala. His face would be covered with sand. He would scream out, Amma Hussein. He would scream out to his uncle Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein would come running to him and he would say, يَعِزُّ عَلَىٰ عَمِّكَ أَن تُنَادِيهِ وَلَا يُجِيبُكَ. It is so tough on your uncle that you would call upon him and he is unable to answer you, and that you need him and he is unable to protect you. Al-Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi would hold al-Qasim in his hands, and he would see him as he would be bleeding profusely from his head. He would hold him close to his chest, he would hug him tight, and he would cry and weep for the state that he is in. This young boy who was in his arms, he was a great representation of Islam, this al-Qasim. He was a young boy at age 12, but he had great willpower and he had great focus, and he was able to attain martyrdom because his greatest focus was to please Allah Almighty by protecting the Ahlul Bayt. And so he reached his greatest purpose in life by doing so. And Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi, they say he would carry al-Qasim and walk into the camp. They say that as he carried al-Qasim, he dragged his feet. He dragged his feet slowly, walking to the camp, for surely Sayyidah Zainab would come and ask about al-Qasim, but al-Qasim was martyred. His mother would come and ask for him, but he was martyred. The girls would come and ask for him, the sisters, the daughters, they would come and ask for him, but he couldn't respond to them. Why? Because he was slain on the land of Karbala. And they say, brothers and sisters, that Imam al-Hussein would carry al-Qasim into the camp. One after the other, they would come and look at al-Qasim as he was martyred. The women and children would start wailing and crying. He would take al-Qasim and place him into the tent of the men of Ahlul Bayt. The ones who were killed on the land of Karbala were placed in a tent. Ali al-Akbar was there. The other sons of Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullahi alayhi were there. All of them were there, and they would say that Imam al-Hussein would place al-Qasim next to Ali al-Akbar, and he would lay between them and cry. And then they would say that Sayyidah Zainab would come into the tent and say, Brother Hussein, please give his mother and the women a time to mourn for their child. And what would happen is that Imam al-Hussein would get up and he would leave, and then the women would enter the tent and cry. It is so beautiful, brothers and sisters, for a mother to hold her son. But what did his mother have to hold? But the cold, martyred body of al-Qasim. She would never see him. She would never see him married. She would never see him grow up and have children. هل من منادي ينادي ومظلوما ومظلوما وغريبا وشهيدا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل بيت رسول الله إلى أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you accept what little we offered. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you remove the debts on all those who are indebted, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. That you return all those who are estranged to their homelands and to their families, Ya Rab. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you remove the oppression of all those who are oppressed, and that you release all those who are imprisoned and are innocent, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. That you relieve all the trials and tribulations on the mu'mineen. That you give health to all of our sick mu'mineen and mu'minat around the world, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, who have asked for our dua. Oh Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you make us as you want us to be, not as we want to be, and that you allow us to focus and to have the willpower to strengthen ourselves so that we can please you and so that we can end up in heaven in the hereafter. Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that by doing so, that you allow us to be servants under the nation of an Imam al-Hujjah, Ajallah Ta'ala Farajahu al-Sharif, and that you support all of the founders that make such majalis possible. Our brothers and sisters in Niagara Falls, they all have needs. Please remember them in your dua. Our brothers and sisters in Dearborn and Toronto and Pomona and all around the world, they have all asked for your dua in London, in Najaf. Please remember them all in your dua. Allah, we ask you and we beseech you that you allow us, Ya Rabbil Alameen, to be grateful and to show gratitude to you and appreciation with every breath that we take. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين، والفاتحة على أرواح المرحومين، ولتعجيل فرج ولي الله على الأرضين، مسبوقة مشفوعة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.